Welcome to This Explainer. Today we are shining a spotlight on a demographic that is, well, almost completely invisible in our everyday cultural conversations. We are talking about Generation X, that kind of quiet, fascinating group born roughly between 1965 and 1980. Think about it. They are the older coworkers who literally never complain, the parents who seem just a little detached sometimes, and the people who actually built the internet but almost never post about their personal lives on it. So today, we're unpacking the deeply misunderstood psychology of this invisible generation.
It's a glaring cultural blind spot, isn't it? I mean, why do we dissect Gen Z and boomers all day long, but completely ignore the generation sitting right in the middle? We analyze Gen Z like they're some fascinating new species, and we never stop talking about millennials and boomers. But this entire generation that just exists quietly in the background is barely ever mentioned. Okay, let's dive into this, because uncovering the psychological framework of Gen X, it actually explains so much about how our modern world functions behind the scenes.
To really get Gen X, we have to time travel back to around 1978. Picture this, an 8-year-old coming home from school to a completely empty house because both parents are at work. And there are no smartphones, no digital tracking to let mom know you made it home. A landmark study published in the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry actually found that by 1984, approximately 7 million kids between the ages of 5 and 13 were regularly unsupervised after school. 7 million. That brilliantly illustrates the sheer, massive scale of the Latchkey Kid experiment. It was an entire generation learning, every single day, that you simply can't always count on someone being there. But you see, that empty house did way more than just foster basic self-reliance. It engineered a highly specific psychological setting that experts call a high-contingency environment. Basically, this means that when their parents did finally get home, the rules hit hard and fast. There was no gentle negotiating, no sitting around discussing feelings. Actions had immediate, real consequences without any buffer time. Because of that direct link between what you did and the immediate outcome, their brains were essentially hardwired to predict consequences in real time. This is exactly why your Gen X colleagues constantly seem to be thinking 3 steps ahead. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how this environment forged another wildly fascinating psychological trait: defensive pessimism. Gen X watched the adults around them talk a really big game about stability, but then they'd turn around and rack up record divorce rates through the 70s and 80s. They watched dedicated, hardworking employees get handed pink slips during sudden corporate layoffs. The rules of life literally kept changing right in front of their eyes. So they built up this emotional armor. They might cross their fingers for good news, sure, but deep down, they always expect the rug to be pulled out from under them. To a younger person, it looks super cynical, but to Gen X, it's just being realistic. And this inherent realism heavily impacts their relationship with modern technology. Think about it. When Gen X messed up as kids, it happened in a basement or like an empty parking lot. A handful of friends knew, and that was the end of it. Total privacy was just the baseline standard. Modern youth, on the other hand, are growing up alongside Ring cameras, viral videos, and the constant public broadcasting of every mistake. This right here is exactly why Gen X completely avoids social media oversharing. To them, blasting your life out to strangers doesn't feel fun or exciting. It feels incredibly risky. They learned very early on that visibility equals vulnerability. There's another huge layer to this psychological armor, too, and that's their famous use of irony. I mean, just think about the environment they grew up in. They literally sat in classrooms doing duck and cover drills under wooden desks as if a half-inch of plywood was magically going to save them from a nuclear blast. Adults treated the apocalyptic threat of the Cold War like it was just another rainy day. When you're forced to hold 2 completely clashing ideas in your head at once, like the world might explode at any second, but I still really need to finish my math homework, you learn to crack a joke and keep things at arm's length. Irony became their permanent psychological shield. So we have this entire generation built on raw independence, defensive pessimism, and ironic distance. But how exactly does a latchkey kid transition into the adult workforce? I mean, how does that intense childhood independence actually translate to professional life? Well, the answer to that is incredibly revealing. Because, their work ethic didn't start with polished, fancy corporate internships. Oh no, it started early. We're talking 5 a.m. paper routes where a 12-year-old was responsible for an entire neighborhood getting the news, bagging groceries, working fast food registers where if the machine broke, they had to calculate the exact change entirely in their heads. These weren't designed to be nice resume builders. Actually, scratch that. They were raw, unfiltered introductions to adult responsibilities. It instilled this incredible, quiet competence from a shockingly young age.
They learn to just put their heads down and do the work without needing an audience to cheer them on. But as they entered the professional world, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing. They were met with this relentless series of historical and economic headwinds. It's like from the political betrayal of Watergate in the 70s to the horribly fumbled AIDS crisis in the 80s. Then, just as the youngest Gen Xers were graduating and finding their footing, the dot-com bubble burst. And when the oldest ones were finally hitting what should have been their peak earning years, boom, the 2008 financial crisis wiped everything out. They have been economically traumatized repeatedly. This history just completely destroyed any lingering faith they might have had in institutional or company loyalty. Which brings us right to their core professional philosophy. So the crucial point is this. Gen X expects absolutely zero loyalty from a corporation. None. But they are fiercely loyal to actual competence. They've spent their entire lives watching incompetent authority figures make terrible decisions. Because of that, they do not care about your fancy job title. If you don't know what you're doing, they have zero patience for you. But if you have earned your position through actual, demonstrable skill, they will absolutely respect you and follow you anywhere.
And this leads us to a fascinating duality in their psychology. Gen X is quite honestly a walking paradox. Because their parents were so often absent, they formed these incredibly tight bonds with their friends out of sheer necessity. So they are simultaneously the most independent generation and yet the most quietly collaborative. Think about it. They will almost never ask you for help. They've been figuring things out alone since they were 8, right? But if you need help, they will reliably show up for you, do the heavy lifting, and do the whole shebang without a single drop of drama or a self-congratulatory post about it online.
However, this extreme independence definitely has a hidden cost. Research published in the Journal of Adult Development is super clear on this. It shows that Gen Xers report significantly lower levels of seeking social support during periods of high stress. They are absolutely incredible in a crisis, for sure, but their extreme self-reliance actually borders on anxiety. It's not that they don't have friends they can ask. It's that, psychologically speaking, asking for help feels dangerously close to admitting defeat.
Now, this self-reliance also completely dictated how they learned. Long before Google and high-speed internet, knowledge had a physical weight to it. It had a tangible cost. Gen X spent hours in physical libraries, hunting through those huge wooden card catalogs just to find a single book. Cognitive psychologists call this deep encoding. Because getting that information required actual physical effort and a significant chunk of time, it became much more permanently integrated into their memory. Knowledge just wasn't cheap, it was earned, and therefore it was valued completely differently.
Let's move to and see how this builds into their relationship with the physical world. When a bike chain slipped off back then, you didn't call a technician. You didn't pull out your phone to look up a tutorial. No way. You flipped the bike upside down, you got your hands totally greasy, and you just figured it out through trial and error. This hands-on problem solving built a lifelong mechanical intuition. It cemented this core belief that with enough patience and maybe just a simple tool, you could master whatever physical challenge was sitting right in front of you.
Fast forward to today. Gen Xers are now parents themselves, and their unique psychology directly clashes with the modern world. It's truly fascinating. Their primary parenting goal was to give their kids the attention and presence they themselves never had growing up. But that exact goal triggers their deepest fear. They worry that by being so heavily involved, by living in this world of helicopter parenting and constant digital surveillance, they're accidentally making their kids too soft, too dependent, and dangerously visible. It's just a constant, exhausting internal tug of war for them. There's a quote that I think perfectly frames their whole identity. It says, they were shaped by a unique moment in history when the old world was dying and the new one hadn't quite been born. Generation X might truly be the very last generation to know what it means to experience profound, utter boredom, to just sit alone with their thoughts and to solve complex problems entirely offline before the internet took over literally everything. They were forged in a very specific, fleeting gap in human history. Ultimately, they are the bridge generation. And, bridges generally don't get much attention, right? People just drive right over them to get to where they're going. But Gen X is absolutely vital. They are the unseen infrastructure keeping our society, our workplaces, and our families running smoothly. They put their heads down, they do the hard work, they hold everything together, and they expect absolutely no applause or validation in return.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Gen X represents a completely unique psychological framework. It's a mindset of quiet competence and offline resilience. So,
What happens to our hyper-connected, highly visible society when the last generation that truly understands how to be alone with its thoughts eventually fades into the background? It's a really profound question about a quiet but incredibly powerful legacy. Thank you so much for joining me to explore the unseen bridge that is Generation X. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.